We aren't going to solve Nantucket's year-round housing crisis in the next hour and 15 minutes, but maybe this will be the first of several conversations that set us as a community on that path. I'm going to kick us off by making a few introductions and giving some important acknowledgments. Then we'll watch a short video, and from there we'll turn it over to tonight's moderator, Thomas, and our panel, and really to you all, for it's your voices that we want to hear from. Thomas Bania is the Executive Director of the Martha's Vineyard Film Festival and Director of One Big Home. We are pleased to have Thomas here to moderate tonight's discussion. When thinking about tonight, I knew Thomas was the right person for the job. If you've seen the movie One Big Home, you know that Thomas knows how to deal with prickly issues in a way that brings people together and finds common ground. My belief that Thomas was the right choice for tonight was further reinforced when I recently learned he'd successfully moderated a discussion last summer between Alan Dershowitz and a leading attorney for the ACLU who were debating whether Trump should be impeached or not. If Thomas could handle that conversation artfully, surely he can handle this one. I want to thank our distinguished panelists for taking the time to be here tonight. We're very pleased to have with us Dawn Hill Holgate, the Vice Chair of the Nantucket Select Board, Cormac Collier, the Executive Director of the Nantucket Land Council, Dr. Margot Hartman, President and CEO of Nantucket Cottage Hospital, David Martin, President and CEO of the Nantucket Chamber of Commerce, and Brooke Moore, member of the Nantucket Affordable Housing Trust Fund. I also want to mention we have with us Philippe Jordi of the Island Housing Trust on the Vineyard. Philippe may share a little later on some of the things that have worked on the Vineyard and how, while it isn't easy, there are solutions when we all work together. We are grateful to many folks, too many folks to mention, for making tonight possible. Still, we'd like to take a moment here to extend our gratitude to each and every one of them, and to note especially Remain Nantucket, Yellow Productions, Moore Studios, Nantucket Cottage Hospital, Nantucket Public Schools, the Nantucket Police and Fire Departments, the Community Foundation for Nantucket, Mariah Mitchell Association, Fairwinds, The Bean, the Nantucket Hotel, the Nantucket Dreamland, Brian Glowacki, and all the Nantucketers who agreed to share their families' stories in our video. Nantucket's shortage of housing that is suitable, stable, and affordable to year-rounders presents a multitude of issues for our community. Or said another way, it creates ripple effects for us all. Some of you might be thinking, when we talk about affordable housing, what are we talking about? I might say, more importantly, who are we talking about?
We value our history and the natural beauty that surrounds us. Yet the heart of our community lies in its people. It's our friends and neighbors who keep this island running, make it fun, and keep us coming back. Nantucket has changed since I roamed these halls. Did you know there's now more than 17,000 people living on Nantucket year-round? That's around 1,700 students that need an education, and about 250 educators and support personnel for all those students to teach them things like math and manners. But do we have enough stable and affordable housing for all those students and teachers? 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, our hospital provides critical health care for thousands within the Nantucket community. A community that supports local businesses. Like these people who have to deal with you before you've had your morning coffee. Ugh. Businesses who employ and serve both seasonal and year-round residents.
look snug.
Can you imagine a Nantucket without the people who keep us safe? Without our resources for wellness and mental health? The organizations that strengthen the community and preserve the legacy of our island's people. The housing problem on Nantucket is no laughing matter. If you're connected to this island, it's guaranteed you're going to know somebody who's been adversely affected by the lack of housing for our year-round community. These are the people that make Nantucket what it is, and they struggle to find, afford, and hold on to suitable year-round housing. The solution isn't easy, but there is one. We've done a great job at conserving our open space and our history. Now let's put that energy into preserving our greatest asset, our people.
So tonight, the ground rules. First, I want to thank Tucker and Brooke for inviting me here, and thank you all for coming. The ground rules are pretty simple. We are not here to talk about the merits. Sorry, can you hear me now? Better? We are not here to talk about the merits or drawbacks of any particular project. As advertised, we are here to talk about what's the best way to solve the housing issue on Nantucket. I will keep us on task in that regard and ask that the discussion be kept respectful. I will pose a question to everyone, the panel and the audience, and we hope that you will keep your comments to 2 minutes. When you get to the last 30 seconds of your talk, we'll have Megan hold up a yellow card so you know you have 30 seconds left. And then when you get to the last 5 seconds, she'll hold a red card up. So hopefully that'll keep things moving. Nothing worse than someone taking 10 minutes of the floor. I think we can all identify with that. So now the question. And I'll go to the panelists first, and we'll go left to right if that's okay with you. When you think about ways to address the workforce affordable housing issue on Nantucket, what ideas come to mind? Are there specific things you'd like to see and things you definitely don't want to see? What would success look like? Would you like to start?
That's a multi-part question.
So we can start with, when you think of ways to address the workforce affordable housing issue on Nantucket, what ideas come to mind? Are there specific ideas, specific things you'd like to see, and specific things you don't want to see? What would success look like?
I'd like to see a variety of things. I mean, I think that a variety of things have been started. When you talk about workforce, there's multi-levels of that. There's our shy numbers below 80%. Then there's needs at 100%, at 150, as high as 200%, or as high as even just stable year-round housing availability. And I think that we need to attack every aspect of that. I would like to see us at a point where we've met our shy numbers, we're satisfied our state requirement, so that we're not open to things that we don't design ourselves and choose to have here. And I would like to then really get to the other levels of housing that we need. I want to see things that are in keeping with Nantucket. more housing density in places that are within walking distance of goods and services, on bus routes. I would like to see more scattered site if possible. And I mean, I think that there are a number of ways that we can get at it, a number of ways where we are getting at it, and it just takes more effort, more funding, more commitment from the community as a whole.
I'd like to ask the audience, does everyone know what the SHI means? So maybe you could explain that concept.
The SHI is the Subsidized Housing Inventory. We are required, every town in Massachusetts is required to have 10% housing that of the year-round housing stock that is under 80% of area median income. And that is based on size of family. There's a formula. And we are currently at about 2.5%. With some of the projects that are in the works, we could be in the next couple of years up to around 8%. And if we can create 24 units of SHI eligible in a year, we get a year of safe harbor, which means that we are not subject to a 40B that's not approved by the town in the beginning.
And if someone from the audience has a question about a particular concept, if you throw your hand up, we'll try to nip that in the bud so that we're not going the whole night with you not knowing what the concept is. I guess we'll move on down.
Hello? Okay.
Your turn.
Hi, I'm Margot Hartman from Nantucket Cottage Hospital, and housing for our employees is an issue that is in my office every day. We're the second largest employer on the island, and we did an employee survey some years ago, and I've done some work on the social determinants of health, one of which is adequate housing in a community. And I know that housing is a health issue, and it concerns me how many of our staff walk around the hospital corridors with shelter anxiety. And I would much rather that they didn't have that, so that they could focus on what we all need them to do, which is provide quality, compassionate care. And so housing really does become a health issue, and I'm very aware of it. We're challenged in recruiting and retaining full-time talent and assisting them in finding various permanent housing solutions, from full-time year-round all the way through the continuum of seasonal or overnight. If a clinician comes to staff a clinic and the weather comes in, we need to be able to house them either for the night before or the night after. For a long time, we had, thank you, our own housing, but it's configured in 2- and 3-bedroom units, and for legal, Stark law reasons, the hospital cannot provide more than the minimum number of bedrooms required to a clinician. So our whole model for staffing the emergency department was turned on its head not too long ago. So what I would like to see is more inventory that's affordable, as Dawn was referencing. We've tried some interesting things at the hospital, including having an intranet site and inviting the community to offer what might be available to a pre-vetted workforce that has a job and is part of the community and contributing to the community. So we are trying to solve the problem in conjunction with the town and everyone here.
Thank you. Let me move on to David. She took 10 of your seconds, David, so you have, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
We're really good friends, so that's fine. I told myself that I was just going to speak from my heart. I've lived here just over a year, and I was hired to come in as the Chamber's new president and CEO, and I remember during my interview, a few people on the hiring committee said, well, you know, housing is an issue. And I had no idea. And I remember this past spring going into the season, getting call after call after call from members that were having issues, you know, finding a place for their managers, their employees, their staff, to sleep. People telling me that they were, housing people in their basements and in their garages and in the storerooms. And there were a couple of occasions where everyone knows where the chamber office is at Zero Main. I'd be walking over to the Stop and Shop for a cup of coffee, and there were 2 occasions I remember specifically, someone getting out of their back seat, stretching, and walking in to Stop and Shop with me to get coffee. We have over 720 members, I think, at this point. We have not taken a position on the project on Surfside. We have not talked about Fairgrounds. We've not talked about the project that's off of Old South. But what we have taken a stance on is the need to find a solution. And I will say as somebody that's been on the island for a year, we spend a lot of time talking about what we don't want. I have heard so many people say why Surfside is an issue. I've heard so many people say why Fairgrounds shouldn't be built. And what I have been saying is and the chamber, I would love to see the chamber take the lead on this actually, is to get leaders from all of the different groups in a room and see where we have common ground. And it is so powerful when you get a group of people that all have different roles and positions agreeing on something, and then start there. Because I know we can do this. The inventories here, the trust fund bill that's languishing right now on the speaker's desk. Imagine if we all got together and got that passed and had that money going into the trust fund. Imagine what we could do with that, and imagine if we all agreed on how to tackle this issue. And there's a part of me that's really excited about this, and there's a part of me that it just hurts for the people that I hear from every day whose people don't have a place to sleep.
Thank you, David. And we'll pass it on down to Brooke.
So I moved to Nantucket 6 years ago, having been a summer person since the 80s. And I joined the Affordable Housing Trust Fund because the headlines hadn't changed since I set foot on Nantucket the first time in 1985. And I thought to myself, if we as a geographically isolated community can't figure out a way to solve this problem, what hope is there for the rest of the world to solve this problem? We have resources, we have talent, we have people with great minds, and there's no reason why it can't happen. And so I joined the Affordable Housing Trust Fund with the goal of trying to create a roadmap. But everybody's got to decide that we're going to get on the road together to do this. That involves funding, it involves compromise, it involves, I'm okay with this even if it's not ideal for me or it's not exactly how I would do it, but it gives homes to people who need a place to live. When you look at those numbers in that video of people who've moved 10 times, their kids, the stress that Margot talked about, I'm a social worker and my training is in social work, the stress on mental health of housing insecurity is an enormous cost to this community. And since I've been involved in affordable housing, literally not a day goes by where I don't hear about someone who's lost their housing or is in need of housing. It's desperate. And I think our willingness to get together and figure out a way to do this is a reflection of who we are as a community and how we care about each other. The thing I've always loved about Nantucket is we've taken care of each other. And I think it's time for us to step up and do that in this way and vote for the funding, agree to compromises that are imperfect in our eyes, and let's get it done.
Thank you, Brooke. Now to Cormac.
Thank you, Tom. My name is Cormac Collier. I'm the Executive Director for the Nantucket Land Council. First off, thanks to Tucker and to Brooke for the invite. Definitely appreciate the opportunity to be here. I am obviously the environmental advocate in this panel. I work hand in hand with the Land Bank and the Conservation Foundation on open space protection. But one of the niches that we work in is really in the political arena and the advocacy arena for environmental protection. And I've talked about affordable housing with Tucker ever since you basically moved back to the island where I got introduced to Tucker about potential opportunities and projects going forward. Just to get right to it, one thing that I think the Land Council and sort of the environmental interests have been fairly successful in is utilizing the regulatory framework that is available to us to promote environmental protection, either through town meeting zoning initiatives, town meeting funding initiatives, through the regulatory framework of all the boards, Planning Board, Conservation Commission, Board of Health. We've created regulations or articles that promote conservation, promote the environmental protection. I can easily see that being done for affordable housing as well, and should be done. One particular idea that I have, and it might just be a springboard for some other conversation, and hopefully some initiatives that other folks are going to be taking in the spring and beyond, is really looking at our zoning and what is available to us to promote year-round workforce and seasonal workforce housing as well. And the elephant in the room is the fact that Nantucket is one of a rare community in the Commonwealth that actually has the ability for a homeowner to create secondary houses on their lot. And the original intention of secondary homes, it's in the definition of the bylaw, is the principal purpose of secondary dwellings is to create housing opportunities through the provision of affordable rental housing for year-round residents, including senior citizens, while affording the owner of the primary residence with the opportunity to generate supplemental income. That's the definition of a secondary house. Unfortunately, it's just not brought into practice. And we've missed a huge opportunity ever since this was created in 80s, 90s. I mean, think about how many houses, secondary homes, could have been utilized for year-round. Maybe they could have gone to the shy list if they qualified. There's incredible opportunity, but there also is still incredible opportunity. Sorry for going over, but the WPI students that are in town, you might see them walking around Worcester Polytech. They do a bunch of different, there's some up in the back there. They're doing some different projects, and one group is doing a build-out analysis. The numbers that they have right now, which is kind of startling and quite fearful, rough estimate, 2,700 more secondary homes can be built on the island, let alone the amount of open lots that there are still available for development of 1,300. So there's a lot of opportunity for secondary. We just brought on tertiary. Hopefully there's going to be some initiatives to actually make those required to be put on the shy list. I just think there's so many opportunities that are out there. We just changed our height restrictions in certain areas of the island to go up to 40 feet, but to go up to 40 feet. But there was no requirement from that 30 to 40 feet to actually get some affordable housing. We could have mandated that if you do go up to 40 feet, you have to put 1 unit of affordable housing in. A lot of opportunity that's available that I think a lot of people need to get involved, as you said, to really explore. But I think there's really the core, besides the funding initiatives, is the regulatory framework. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Cormac. So we're going to go to the audience now, and under the same framework, you'll have 2 minutes, and we have people with microphones, one on each side of the audience.
Collier, I had a question. The secondary housing going forward from this point on, can they be limited to what the rules originally were put in there for?
Did everybody get that question? Do we actually need to make any further revisions to what is currently out there? I think that's up for interpretation. I think there certainly needs to be some sort of framework to make sure that there would be some sort of enforcement for year-round, which is difficult with the current staffing that's available to the planning department right now. So I think that's actually a question straight to Andrew Vorse to sort of see if they can do that through their framework now.
Okay, now don't be shy. We're not all going to be as well-spoken as Cormac. We can't expect that. We have a gentleman back here.
Matt Fee. I'm going to give a shout out to the hospital. My wife and I renovated Flock, the old bake shop building on Orange Street. We put a 1-bedroom apartment in the back. We went to the hospital after it sat for 6 months and we couldn't get out of our own way. I went to the hospital and said, geez, we have this apartment. It's right down the street. It'll be perfect. There were 6 people in our shop, in my wife's shop that afternoon, and a couple more called. We had a great person. She's been there for 2 years now, almost. So if someone in the audience, or if you know anyone that is looking for a really good tenant, you can go to the hospital and it'll be filled immediately.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Right behind you, we have one more.
Question, I'm not sure how the 2% that goes to the land bank for every transaction, real estate transaction, was decided. But why isn't there, I don't know, a similar thing for affordable housing?
I'll take that one. So we have tried. The process is a home rule petition, and actually town meeting has voted for the housing bank bill for the last 3 years at town meeting. And a number of people I've gotten involved fairly recently have done some pretty heavy lobbying efforts at the State House, but it does have to pass the Massachusetts legislature as a home rule petition, and we just have not, we've gotten it out of committee with positive recommendations and just not been able to get it to the floor for a vote with the other priorities in the legislature. So we had structured it as a 0.5% transfer fee paid by the seller, only on the value in excess of $2 million. And we had a 10-year sunset clause built into it, and we just couldn't get the final traction up at the State House. So we will be reviewing whether to take another pass at that next year. And
if anyone wants to help, the most powerful lobby against it is the Association of Real Estate Brokers, and send them a letter. Say how much we need it here.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else from the audience? Please don't be shy.
just a quick clarification, it's the Massachusetts Board of Realtors, not the Nantucket Realtors. Nantucket Realtors have come to Boston and lobbied for this legislation. So I just wanted to be clear on that. Our local realtors are very much in support of it.
So Tucker, maybe while the audience waits, you could answer the same question we posed to everyone else.
I'm really here to listen. I mean, this is a conversation. I'm more interested in hearing what you all have to say. But it is a very good question that was asked about the housing bank bill. There has been an extraordinary effort made on behalf of this bill by the select board, our local realtors, as was mentioned, our Chamber of Commerce, our conservation organizations have been very supportive of this legislation, and it is the Massachusetts Association of Realtors that kind of has the speaker's ear at the moment. But the governor has indicated he would sign it if it gets to his desk.
So Philippe, would you mind sharing with us some of the things that you found success with on the Vineyard?
Good evening. I'm the founding director of the Island Housing Trust. We've been an organization for the past 13 years on the Vineyard. We're a private nonprofit community land trust and community development corporation. So we have been working in partnership, first and foremost, with the towns. We have 6 towns on the island. And we've worked to create both home ownership and rental opportunities. Right now we have about 80 that we've created, and we have a goal of creating 100 new homes by the end of 2020. So a fairly ambitious goal. In terms of our state mandatory inventory of housing, we only have about 5%, about 450 units of housing towards the state inventory. So we have essentially half of our way to go in terms of achieving that. But like you, we have a need beyond the 80% area median income homes. We have people that are, up to 150% easily that need a place to live, whether it be year-round rentals or home ownership. So I think what we're looking at is real, and we have created some of those units through ownership, typically resident home sites and those type of opportunities. We still have a ways to go on that as well. So I think what we've been looking at is 20% of our year-round housing stock being dedicated to affordable at some income level. And right now what we're doing is trying to come up with new initiatives, new and innovative initiatives in terms of raising capital and finding opportunities in terms of identifying land that's suitable for our purposes. And we're working with not only the towns now, but other nonprofits and conservation organizations to do that. And I think my time is up.
Thank you, Philippe. So is there anyone from the audience, maybe we can make the question a little more basic. Maybe it was too intimidating with the 3 questions, but would anyone like to comment on specific things you'd like to see? Would you like to see more apartments? Would you like to see more homes? Or is this just to keep it what you'd like to see? I feel like you have the ears of the people who are going to make it happen. We have a woman in the 3rd row right up in front here. Oh, gentleman here first. Go ahead, sir.
I'd like to see a little selection, just availability. I heard somebody say we have inventory, but you know, when you go to the classifieds and you look up apartments for rent or, you know, year-round rental, you're looking at advertisements or want ads for people who need housing. For my staff, you know, if they can find it, they're forced into something that's really not desirable at a very high level. So some just bare minimum level of selection. I'm not even getting into I want to live in this part of the island or that part, but just something that's decent housing at a reasonable price.
Thank you for that. And we have a gentleman behind you. Oh, great, okay.
Thank you, Patrick Tafe. Some of you may not want to hear this, might not sound right, but I don't think we owe anyone housing. We don't. But it is a state law that we reach 10%, the shy list. And because it is a state law, I think it would be nice if the most powerful entity on Nantucket, which is our town government, should work with the state to possibly change some of the 40B laws so that the people that are already renting their secondary homes at an affordable rate could be included on the shy list. And I'm not opposed to my taxes going up to pay for affordable housing that blends into the community. And the gentleman from Martha's Vineyard, you might be able to tell us a little bit about your youth lot program where Martha's Vineyard requires developers, people subdividing their land, to give a lot that gets lotteried off. And I mentioned this at town meeting one year, and it never went anywhere. But Nantucket has never required developers to help with the housing problem, ever. Developers have never given back to Nantucket. And I think as a town, you know, we could work with the people in Boston and, you know, try and come up with something that works for all of the houses that we have already that probably meet the 80%, 100%, 120 that would count towards the shy. So changing laws, that's something that we could do.
Thank you very much. And Philippe, you want to take a stab at answering that before we go on?
Sure, yeah. There are requirements in terms of inclusionary zoning and exactions, I guess you'd refer to it as, when someone is going before a regional body, the Martha's Vineyard Commission. They actually are revisiting their affordable housing policy in terms of what they're expecting from typically commercial developers and those who are developing over 10 acres or 10 units. And then in the towns, there's also an expectation too, which varies from town to town. In the past, they have been typically resident home sites, as you're referring to, but more and more so, people are expecting not just the land, but the actual home to be built as well, which is something that's analogous to the 40B requirements. 25% of whatever is built has to be affordable and built. So that's what we've been seeing on the island, and frankly, it's similar across the country. If you go to places in Colorado like Breckenridge, there's quite a bit of development going on in terms of condominiums and things like that, and they have increased their percentage of year-round housing for their workforce from, I think, less than 10 to close to 30% now through some of these measures.
And just for those who just walked in, they're answering the question right now, are there specific things you'd like to see happen with affordable housing? And I saw there's a person here in the second row. You can borrow my mic.
Dawn, you mentioned something about having more density, near transportation on island, because I think traffic on island is another problem for everybody. And so what I'm wondering is, how do we mesh those two things together? I mean, this isn't just for you, and I'm sorry nobody from the planning board is here, but in terms of what do we do to facilitate that, and what will we need to do, and I don't know if zoning is a piece of it, Cormac, or whatever, but I just think that putting these two things together is a way we might be able to do something, but we would need leadership for it as well. So I'm curious to know if other people think that relationship would be a useful one to solve the problem. Thanks.
Did you get the question? Can you repeat the question? And she's got it.
I could speak to some things that we have done. A couple of years ago at town meeting, we created, or maybe even more than a couple of years ago, a new zone called commercial neighborhood, which allows some apartment building type of setups, which can also be split into individual cottage type units, which is similar to what was done at 7 Surfside. That's for individual cottages. Oh my goodness, I don't know what's going on with this microphone. So those kind of things have been contemplated and put into place. We also, this is our first year having year-round bus service. So it somewhat remains to be seen, by having that in the most populated areas on a year-round basis, how much that might actually help mitigate our traffic situation. I rode the bus a couple of weeks ago to one of our meetings, and we actually did the full loop and then back again and talked to some people who were on the bus with us. And it was just really interesting, because one lady had a car and she didn't have a license yet. And she was saying how she really didn't need it. She took the bus to work every day. And another gentleman said that he did not have a car, and Jason actually asked him, well, what would you do if this bus wasn't running year-round? And he said, well, I guess I'd have to buy a car. So those were two good, sort of success stories about the bus. And I'm sure that there is more that we can contemplate doing, and restricting, promoting that everything that's being built has some kind of affordable or year-round component.
Anybody else? Something you'd like to see happen in the affordable housing? Yes, sir.
I'd like to see the state help us out. I've been to the ZBA meetings, and we keep talking about the state helping, working with the state. And their best idea for affordable housing is 40Bs, and it's not a help. It's a hindrance. It helps pollute the land. It uses our resources. So when we were at the ZBA, one of the questions I had was, who's here from the state? There was no one. I called our representatives. They said there was little they could do. So if we're waiting for the government to help us, I work for the government, we're in trouble. So we're on our own. But I think we need to start demanding from the state and the federal government, whoever we can, to do something, or do what we want to do, not what they want to do, because they won't even show up at a meeting to voice their opinion or give us the true intent of these laws, which they probably don't even know what they are.
Thank you, sir.
Hi. Do we have to stand up? Val Oliver. I live in Mid-Island, and I think part of the quandary is the congestion and the cars. I was wondering, why can't we spread it out into little pods around the island and provide public transport to those areas, as opposed to making everything walkable? It's just not possible to cram everything in Mid-Island. That's one thing. Secondly, let's try to come up with an incentive for people to rent their units as affordable units and year-round. Unfortunately, we're in this market right now where everything that used to be year-round is now, whoa, I can rent it in the summer and make a buttload of money, like Airbnb or Nightly or whatever. So I think it has to come from us. We have to come up with some sort of incentive and say to people, hey, you know, if you do this, this is a benefit you can reap tax-wise, or I don't know. But I think, you know, throw somebody a carrot and they might jump in.
Thank you for that.
So I'd like to follow up on what Val said. You know, as sitting on the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, I see there's kind of two ways to go about this, right? There's the carrot approach and there's the stick approach. And I think that there's probably got to be some balance of the two, but I do believe there is room to incentivize people, because I think that the difference in revenue between doing seasonal rentals for 8 or 10 weeks and renting year round is probably not, for a lot of people, if they actually sat down and crunched the numbers, it wouldn't be that much of a difference, and that there is potentially room for some kind of incentive program. That's the carrot. And then, of course, there's the question of enforcement on housing that's being rented illegally, over-occupied. That's sort of the stick that has to come with the carrot. And I think that a lot of this is about education. It's about bringing us together. I'm going to keep harping on that idea of us coming together as a community.
Cliff Williams again. I don't need carrots. I rent pretty cheaply, and the state doesn't recognize it. So that just goes to show you that they're not serious about this issue.
Okay, we're going to go to our gentleman in the front row here.
My name is Brian Sullivan. I'm also on the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. One of the things that I'd like to see is a way for businesses not to compete in the year-round housing market by taking things seasonally. So is there a better opportunity for large businesses to effectively create dormitory housing and then free up smaller housing units for year-round capacity? We do have some dormitory zoning codes, some maps, but I don't know if there's a way to incentivize businesses to work in that direction. I think that that could be one venue, because if one dormitory had 19 beds, it'd be like creating 4 houses back into the year-round market when that business is only using them for 7 months a year. So I'd like to see some way to incentivize that group. And again, that's a small site. It would be one property with that opportunity. So that's one thing that I'd like to see explored, in addition to how do we use the existing stock that exists, whether it's Cliff's house or to Val's point, and getting people to rent on a year-round basis versus the flip-flop seasonal option of, it's basically the same group of people moving in the same group of houses that are seasonal when they do the swap. So how do we figure out just to keep them in one house rather than moving 16 times into 10 different houses with 16 other people?
Thank you, Tobias Glidden. Tom, nice to see you. I have 2 questions, one to Philippe. I'm interested in using land lease models for affordable housing. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about projects that you've seen that have been successful, where either the municipality or a nonprofit leases land. And the reason why I'm curious about that or that model is because in talking to folks who are interested in kind of setting down a foot here, whether it be a nurse or a doctor or a teacher, they're not really interested in renting in the long term. They're interested in owning here, and that mechanism for owning in the long term is very challenging at the high rate it's at. And I see a land lease potentially, whether that's funded through the town or through a nonprofit, as being a mechanism for someone to purchase equity in a home and be able to kind of have a stake in their community and allow it to be affordable at the same time to a certain capacity.
So our organization is a community land trust, and the model is based on what you're saying, which is we retain ownership of land and we lease it for 99 years. So essentially what we're doing is taking the land cost out of the equation. And the person owns their proper home. They get a leasehold mortgage. And like They have full rights to use the property just as if they were to own the dirt. The community's investment is retained, the land, and is then enables the next family to be able to purchase the home at a price that's affordable. So that's a model that we've been using for the past 13, 14 years. We have about 60 or so homes on leased land. And we also lease ourselves. So recently, for instance, we leased land from the town of West Tisbury to build 9 apartments. So that can be used both ways. As a nonprofit, they wanted to assure that that property was going to be maintained for its intended purpose. So instead of selling us the land, they leased us the land. It serves the same purpose. We're able to mortgage and build the units. But it stays in the community's interest.
Anybody else? Yeah, right over here.
Hi, Philippe. I know this isn't your organization, but I've heard about another organization on the vineyard that uses historic properties as potential housing opportunities. Do you know about that? The Nantucket or the Vineyard Preservation Trust? You heard about that?
I think there is some use for housing, but not much. I think Allie's General Store might have some units above it, and they lease that out. I'm not really quite sure, but I don't think they do a tremendous amount of housing from what I know. I could be wrong.
Hi, I have a question about the leasehold model. What are the terms of the lease upon death of the leasehold owner or upon sale? I would imagine upon sale it continues to be income restricted. But what happens upon death? Do they get to pass it down?
That's a good question. So the lease, the spouse or the partner has rights in terms of being an heir to that owner. And in some situations, when we're not working with the state, because the state doesn't allow it, we have allowed children to be to be able to receive that property without being income qualified. So as the heir, they can receive that house as theirs. However, they do have to live there year-round, at least 11 months of the year. So that requirement is still held. And if they should sell it, then there's a maximum resale price. And we use an index, which is the area median income. It's been, over the past 10 years, about 3% increase on an annual basis. We report that to the assessor every year, so the assessor knows exactly what the resale price or the value of the house is for the purposes of assessment. And it's very clear and clean cut. There's no appraisal necessary on an annual basis. It's a very easy system to administer down to the penny. So the next purchaser exactly has to be income qualified. We as an organization have the right of first refusal, which we can then transfer. In many cases, there, as you have here, have more demand than there's supply, so we usually put it out to a lottery.
Tucker, just a time check. It's 6:10. We have until 6:30 or 6:15? 6:30. 6:30, great. Anybody else? What would you like to see? What do you definitely not want to see? Well, what? We have someone there.
Hi, Val Oliver again. I have a really crazy question, and don't throw things at me. What about like a real tiny house, like the tiny houses you see on TV, that can circumvent all the building code, and that's why they're little, park somewhere out in the boondocks, like you see other places, summer only, would house a lot of summer employees?
Who can answer that question? I think your mic's off. I see a red light.
The only thing about developing multiple units out is wastewater management is a challenge. I'm not saying an insurmountable challenge, but it's a costly and complex challenge. So that's the reason why, you know, centralizing around available infrastructure is the way it usually goes.
How about letting people put them on their in their yards or on their lots?
I think it's I think it's definitely worth exploring. I'm not saying not. I'm just saying it's just a piece of the puzzle.
I just was going to say there are no crazy ideas here tonight, Val. And I have heard the idea of a cruise ship being parked in the harbor for seasonal housing. So,
our charter. I would like to hear comments on a smaller version of Park Circle, if this might work, like having 4 buildings in an area rather than as many as they have.
I mean, I think there's a lot of appeal and a lot of public support for the idea of smaller, scattered site development of affordable housing. So it's definitely on the table. So if that's what you're... Oh, duplexes and so forth. Yeah. You're right, absolutely. I mean, I think that the zoning allows for different things in different locations in Nantucket, and maybe Tucker's the better person to address that question about quadplexes and...
I mean, I can't speak to specific zones, but we'll take down the idea of a smaller version of Park Circle for sure.
Yeah.
Meg Glidden, Tobias's mom. You said there's no crazy ideas, okay? So what about the schools sit empty all summer? Can we put housing in the schools? They got bathrooms, they got plumbing, they got electricity, they got kitchen, they got everything. Open it up. Summer housing. I would love for the people that work for me, well, the people that work for me live with me, and they pay $100 a week, no problem. But other companies, I'm hearing they're putting their employees up in their basement for $250 a week, and there's 6 people in the basement. So if those people could get into a mat on the floor at the school, they would love it. And that would be income for the summer, and it would be housing. Second crazy idea. Some way to incentivize people who have a lot of house, but don't have a lot of people in it. I've got a 4-bedroom. 6 kids. We used all the bedrooms. They all grew up. Now I've got a 4-bedroom, and it's just me and one of the kids. So we rent out half of our house to a young family. So I'm using 2 bedrooms. They're using 2 bedrooms. There are a lot of people on this island who have more house than they're using. Is there a way we could incentivize that to get people to double up? Just an idea.
Good ideas. Do you want to answer that, Tucker?
I just was going to mention that the Civic League is working on something in that regard in terms of incentivizing people who may have extra room in their home to open it up to folks either on a year-round or a seasonal basis.
Going back to that concept about the large house that's gotten empty as the kids leave. How about just renting out rooms? Does something like that work? And that gets me to my fundamental question of just what is required in order to satisfy the regulations for the housing requirement in order to comply. And I think I heard 2 bedrooms before, but is that, what are the rules? I don't know.
Tucker.
In terms of what does it take to reach our 10%? So right now, essentially, if you had a secondary dwelling that you said, I want it to be included on our subsidized housing inventory list, currently, you effectively would be required to put a longer term affordability restriction on it, and I believe the minimum is 15 years, and that you would be renting it to someone who qualified at the 80% area median income level or less, and area median income for Nantucket, 100% is 114,000 and change today. So 80% of it, roughly, we're talking 90,000 for a family of 4. So you would have to commit to renting to someone who qualified at that level. And this is kind of the kicker at the moment, that you, even if you were like Mr. Williams, I think, who's saying, hey, I rent to someone like that today who qualifies, and I may be willing to put a long-term restriction and keep doing this for a number of years. Today, you can't just fill it with the person you know. You have to fill it through a lottery system in order for it to qualify. It might end up with going to the person you know, but those are the types of things that I think we can talk to our legislators about tweaking, if you will, the 40B law. And we can certainly talk to them about more than that with the 40B law, but at least thus far, our legislators would indicate that it's a 40, 50-year-old law with firmly entrenched parties on both sides. And the idea that we might be able to change it overnight anyway is maybe not realistic.
Thank you, Tucker. You have someone over here.
You asked for things that we would like to see. I would like to see a group or people up front there continue to explore inclusionary zoning. We've heard from Philippe that it exists on Martha's Vineyard. It exists on Provincetown. Other towns have passed this. So and of course, with every idea, there's unintended consequences often, so we need to be thoughtful about it. You learn from Martha's Vineyard, learn from Provincetown. Second thing is, Cormac was talking about enforcement being a problem. Let me go back to Martha's Vineyard. You've got an inclusionary bylaw. How do you enforce it so that, other than the land lease thing that you talked about, do you have other housing options that require different enforcement options that are being successful? We have our secondary dwelling, but we've not been very successful about that. What can we do?
So there are many different types of housing, from accessory apartments, as you mentioned. There was a period where our regional housing authority would monitor those on an annual basis. So if people did rent them, they had to rent them affordably, but they weren't required to rent them. They could allow family members or staff to occupy them. So there was only a certain percentage that were actually being rented. But you're right, the capacity question is an important one in terms of having the ability to monitor and enforce these things. And when it comes to most of what's been done in the past, it's really related to ownership. And in that case, these are either deed restriction, or in our case, we do a ground lease model that restricts the property. So that again is enforced by whomever, whether it's the town or the regional housing authority or ourselves. But yeah, the capacity question is a big one, and something that hasn't been mentioned tonight is the fact that there is going to be new revenues that are going to be available to the town, and a requirement that the town register all short-term rentals. So if the town chooses to, it can levy a fee to actually register short-term rentals. Because it's going to be required by the state. There'll be a state registry. And there can be an additional tax imposed on those rentals, as you currently have with hotels, motels, and B&Bs. So that capacity question could be answered in terms of revenues dedicated from that from those sources of funds that currently exist, because we've estimated, at least on Martha's Vineyard, that it's at least at 5 or 6% surcharge on short-term rentals. We're looking at easily at $6.5–7 million a year.
We had someone up, their hand up.
There may be something in the works, but I just wonder if there's not some sort of, not zoning, but cooperation where the town could work with some of the conservation organizations to perhaps put some type of housing on a small amount of it that might help provide some units. And I don't know if that's been talked about. Tucker, do you know from the town's perspective, or Cormac from Land Council? I mean, I know Land Council is just one of.
So I'm going to talk like as Tucker Holland, not as Tucker Holland, a housing specialist. But I think one of the things we all very much enjoy about living here and find as a big part of our quality of life is the open space and conservation land. So I don't know that the idea of taking land that is already in conservation and using it for housing has been, I'm not aware that that's been talked about, certainly by the town, like nothing in my capacity. The governor was here a couple summers ago and basically was offering, at that point, part of their efforts to help communities with housing was to say, hey, we may be willing to let you use some state land that, for housing purposes. And we said, that's a wonderful concept. We don't want to use our state land, the state forest, for housing. You can help us in other ways. There's a housing bank bill up at, in your neck of the woods. But so what the conservation groups have done, I mean, they all recognize the issue, I think, very well. And what the land bank has done, actually, Ann Kuspa and I worked with the land bank to adopt a similar policy to the Vineyard Land Bank housing policy, so that when they're approached about a particular parcel, the first thing they do is take a look at it and say, hey, is there a portion of this that might actually lend itself well to housing? Like it's right on public transportation, it's on town sewer and water and so forth. And they're more than willing to work in partnership to subdivide the land before it is acquired by them, which they have to do in order for this to work. But the problem has been there hasn't been the funding to acquire the housing portion of that subdivision.
Yeah, thank you. Because we have been working on different ideas. One of the things that Tucker and I have done is sat down a few times now and looked at the maps and basically looked at the properties that are available or could be available for some sort of affordable housing project. And I certainly understand the idea of utilizing certain conservation land. I can't speak for the land bank or the foundation. The land council's land is restricted through the donation of a donor, where the landowner still owns it. We don't own the fee, so that would take the land council land somewhat out of the equation. But I do want to make an important point, is that there is town land available for affordable housing. It's just there's not money available to build and run that housing. There's plenty of property that's out there that the town currently owns. It just doesn't have a funding mechanism or revenue source to build on it.
Someone else with their hand up?
Collier, is there an entity that could work with the town for the funding of the building of these units?
I think Ann behind you with the Housing Nantucket could work with that. The Affordable Housing Trust Fund, an entity of the town, is working on certain those ideas. There's certainly entities that are on island that could take on all of these initiatives. Not to say that they're not doing these initiatives. There's plenty of stuff that a lot of these groups are already doing and are already looking at, and those entities are available to continue to do more, just to answer your question.
Yes, ma'am.
I think that there's a couple things that we should consider. One is that we do have an entity. We have the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, and they have money. They have more than $1 million. So if the town has land that can be leased by the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, then we should work to sort of make that happen and make a solution. And similar to what Sully was saying about the dormitory-style housing, if what they did was lease the land, build the dormitory-style housing, then it puts larger units back into circulation. But I think overall from the conversation, there's really two things that we should be talking about, and they're separate issues. One of which is what I just spoke about, working with the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, making sure some solution happens. And I think the other thing that we're hearing tonight is that the other issue is, what are we doing about 40B housing and 40B development? Because that specifically has to do with the SHI list. These other solutions have really nothing to do with the SHI list. They are solutions and they're great, but they don't do anything about 40B developments. And I think that's an important distinction for people to understand and recognize. The regulations around anything that you could do for tax incentives, they're quite onerous. And to your point, Tucker, would take years to fix. I think the only other short-term thing that we as a community can do is this bill that's still in the House. And it's unfortunate that we can't seem to push that further. I mean, this is a community with a lot of social and economic clout, and it seems to me that via official lobbying or unofficial lobbying, we should be able to identify some people who can influence our government to make this a priority. I mean, that's what I'd like to see happen.
Can I
respond to that?
You can respond, David, then we'll go to Tobias, and then it's 6:30. So I'll let you wrap it up after that. Go ahead. Oh, go ahead.
So in response to that, myself and a couple of other local citizens have drafted a warrant article that I will be submitting on November 19th, and will be a borrowing authorization of up to $30 million for the town through the Affordable Housing Trust Fund designated by the Board of Selectmen to purchase units that are currently built and constructed and put them onto the SHI list. So that's a large amount of money. The taxpayer will have the decision whether or not they want to do that, but I think that article will directly address the issue of the SHI list, which seems to be a major concern for people. I do think these other elements that we're talking about tonight are incredibly interesting and very valuable in the long term. We should really focus on them and not just be blinded by the short term. I do think that is important, so I would look for anybody's who's in the room support on that article. Come town meeting, you'll hear more about it. Secondly, just another idea. I was really appalled when the Stop and Shop built their new building, and nothing happened upstairs as far as affordable housing goes. And I was wondering, maybe through the building department or the town, the same happened over at Richmond. They built some units, and there's no housing upstairs. Bruce just mentioned to me the fire station upstairs. You know, there's no housing upstairs. You know, it's just there's a just empty space or trusses. And so kind of mandating that through the building code or some capacity, when people get their permits, they have to use the whole footprint of the building instead of winging it on the cheap.
Thank you, Tobias.
I got here a little late, so you may have spoken about this, Ray, but I've spoken to some of the people up here before about something called the General Land Area Minimum, which is a way to kind of stall a future 40B. And I know it's been looked at in a manner that says, oh, it's probably not going to work on Nantucket. But the more I look into it, the more I realize that it just might. And I think it's worthy of consideration. One of the major stumbling blocks, of course, to that concept is that some of the conservation and preservation entities have the ability to sell their lands. And that's something I think we can deal with and correct in the public interest in dealing with those entities. And it's basically a land area calculation that needs to be done in advance, because when a 40B submits, you've only got 21 or 30 days to submit a very comprehensive plan that says, hey, we qualify for the general land area minimum. And that would forestall a 40B for up to 2 years. But you have to be prepared, and it's a tremendous amount of work. And I understand why some people have looked at it and say, hey, this is untenable. But the more I look at it, I think it's worthy of consideration.
Thank you, sir. I do want to point out it's 6:34, so maybe we'll let Brooke and David wrap it up.
Mind if I go? I want to talk about 40B for a second, because 40B is the state's way of reminding us that we're not meeting our affordable housing need. And whether we like it or we hate it, it is in the background as a reminder of that. And the way to forestall 40B development is to create housing at a rate of 24 units a year. And if we were doing that consistently over time, we would be in control of our destiny here on Nantucket. And I think the select board has established that as a strategic planning goal. And I see that as a short-term solution, but we have a great need that is far beyond what the state even mandates for us. And that's what I think we need to recognize as a community, and that'll be my final word for the night.
We'll give the panelists each an opportunity to make a closing comment, and then you, Tucker.
I just wanted to say there have been some inspired ideas tonight, and legislators and government has come up. And I worked in Washington, D.C. for a number of years, and if I learned anything, it was that government doesn't listen to small groups, but they do listen to wondrous choruses of loud, harmonious voices. And if we could start speaking with one voice and get some of these ideas together and be on the same page, they would listen. The bill that has come up a few times that is in Boston could be passed if they thought we were all on the same page. I know from the groups that I'm a part of in Boston, and when I'm in the State House as part of the Chamber of Commerce, they don't think we're on the same page. And politicians are never going to want to wade into that if they think they're wading into something that's a lot of debate. So let's get on the same page. Let's take some of these ideas. I would love to see a group, not a government group, but I would love to see a group of people on this island that truly care about this, and we could sit and talk about it, put these ideas together, and start speaking as one voice. You know, not to have a town meeting where we're snapping at each other and nothing gets done by the end of it. Let's speak with one voice. And if we do that, we can solve this problem. And government will listen. Legislators will listen, locally and on a state level. I'm convinced of that.
I'd love to know more about what we could do to come together and move that bill forward. I mean, the fact that it sounds like it's ready to go, it just needs a push. So let's figure out how to do it. The other thing that I was thinking about was Tobias's notion of leasehold land. And I remember when I lived in England, it was such a surprise that most of the property in the London area is leasehold. And if you buy there, it seems so alien to me as an American, but it works. And it's a great way to think about it, especially if there's an entity that owns land like the town, and the notion that it could be held in trust, but the whole cost of the land taken out of the transaction, which is so burdensome, may be a way to just release the obstacles, or some of them.
I know that right now as a community, we've been really upset about unfriendly 40Bs and the threat of them. But I just wanted to point out that 40B is not always a terrible tool. Sachem's Path was a completely town-supported, heavily town-subsidized project, all single-family homes, all affordable at 3 different levels, all have many people that I've known for most of my life who've moved into them. So there are just, there are many costs and benefits to this whole housing thing. Nothing is ever perfect. So there's two problems we're combating. Getting to our SHI number so that we get to do things the way that we completely choose to do them, but also recognizing that someone said in the beginning that back in the 80s, it was the same stories in the newspaper, the same Nantucket shuffle, the same just heartbreaking stories that we hear every day. And community-wise, we really need to recognize that quality of life is so important.
I was going to say, with regard to the trust fund having money and kind of going out and doing something, the trust fund has about $1.5 million in it right now. So let's think about Sachem's Path. Sachem's Path was 9 acres of town land, so for free, and $3.5 million from the town, plus $3.5 million from the state, which they had programs for at that point to do ownership projects. So it's going to take a little more than $1.5 million to get where we want to go, like that $30 million article, Tobias. So Dawn mentioned stories. Here's a story that I heard for the first time the other day and I hear a lot of stories, but this one kind of knocked my socks off. So the story was, we've heard about families in basements separated by sheets, mattresses on floors, and garages, et cetera. So the news story is, I'm going to rent you, Cormac, this bedroom from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., and David, I'll rent it to you for the other 12 hours. That's real. That's happening right here in our community. And while, we may not owe anyone a home, I have a little trouble sleeping at night knowing that.
Can I add one more?
Well, thank you all for doing this. I was speaking to Philippe at the Open. I think we need to do this on Martha's Vineyard. We tend to debate current projects rather than just come together and talk. So I feel honored to be here and grateful to have met you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.